My arm and ear healed up pretty quickly after my last case, so I was back at work. Out of the blue, I was asked to interview someone for my pie firm. My small company was doing pretty well with only a few employees. When I wasn't working with Nick, I was helping in the office. We were taking in jobs almost faster than we could handle them. Having one more person would be a help. When he arrived, it wasn't what I expected. Who Nick recommended was very short, only coming up to half my height. I've seen a lot of supernatural creatures, and yet his face took me a few seconds to adjust to. It was a bit too cute to act professional around. His face was mouse-like, with a pointed nose and covered in fur. His big brown eyes looked around nervously, and his big fluffy ears twitched. The ears were pointed, more like the ones on a fox instead of a mouse, to match his face. He was dressed in a button-down shirt and pressed pants for the interview. My hands were itching to pet his head, and I prayed he didn't notice. He handed over his resume and thanked me for seeing him. I looked at overseeing. His name was Tippy. No last name, and not that much work experience either. I wouldn't mind having some extra help, but can you interact with humans? I asked, looking over to him. He appeared puzzled by my question. Letting out a squeak, his face shifted to a human one, which was flushed and embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I forgot to put my human face on," he said quickly, almost about to cry. I needed to calm him down before we went on. I got him a drink and let him sit down so he could go over the reason why he was there. "I was hoping to take jobs for finding lost pets through your company," he said quickly after gulping down the juice I handed him. "I'm not in it for the money. It's just something I want to do. I figured your company gets those kinds of requests, and they're not all that great pay-wise, so I could take care of those. I've also heard you have a computer person. I'm not good with them and hoped he could help me by finding listings online. I'm very good at transportation spells, so can do a job anywhere. I have taken smaller jobs with lost pets. If I did find any leads or the pet, I never accepted payment for that sort of job. It was something that took up a lot of time and nearly always had a heartbreaking result. Those jobs were tough on me." Tippy not only wanted to do them, but had the skills to find the lost animals better than any human. I would be glad to add him to the team. Morty might complain a little that we're adding more to his workload, but it wasn't as if he didn't have the time. We can arrange that. I don't have any jobs like that currently, but we can check online together to find any local listings right now if you'd like. Tippy appeared flattered that someone took him up on the offer so easily. He almost cried again. I figured most creatures in the supernatural world looked down on him for his interests. Everyone should have a hobby they enjoyed, and his was a pretty honorable one. I would help him as much as I was able to. Maybe in the future I could slowly get him set up for an animal rescue. We found him a few jobs to work on pretty quickly. He would first check out all the animal shelters to see if the missing dogs and cats made their way there. Then, he was going to check the streets. I wanted to go with him, but my phone rang. Abarash was on the other end asking if I could meet up with Nick to check out a possible job. The issue would be how to get there. Tippy spoke up, saying he could drop me off as long as he knew the location. As I moved the couch so he could draw the circle for the transportation spell, he explained a few things. Some creatures were better suited for different spells. His specialty was the transportation spells. For some reason, it cost him almost no magic. If Nick attempted to make one, he wouldn't be able to with his small internal magic supply, so he had to rely on other sources. Tippy could make 10 spells with the same amount of magic Nick held. No one really understood why it worked like that, and just accepted that certain creatures were better at certain things. He was going to be very useful if spells like these were easy for him. I was always getting sent somewhere with someone needing to pick me up. Tippy waved at me and we wished each other luck on our cases. Being moved by a spell wasn't entirely pleasant. It always made me feel a bit seasick for a few seconds afterwards. Where I ended up this time was a cemetery. Not an ancient one like the case with the dogs that Nick ended up adopting. It looked fairly modern, one you could find anywhere. The sun was setting, casting an orange light over the gravestones and long iron gate. "Skylar," I heard Nick call my name from outside the cemetery. I quickly found him speaking with a pair of officers that were just leaving. A fair number of cases were ones that were taken over from the regular police. Nick could flash a badge and have no issues ushering the cops away if needed. "What's going on?" I asked, as I watched the pair leave in their squad car. "A man was found murdered a few nights ago. Normally that does not attract the attention of the corporation. However, this place has been rumored to be haunted for years. So far, we hadn't come across any real ghosts. All the hauntings were from creatures being mistaken for one. Even with the supernatural being real, I never thought about the afterlife. I grew up without any kind of religion, so my worldview wasn't shaken when I saw that witches and zombies were real." Nick listed off the small rumors floating around about the graveyard. Normal stuff, people seeing a figure at night, eerie wailing, and people thinking someone touched them. "It will be some trouble if this turns out to be a real ghost," Nick said, his voice trailing off as he looked beyond the gate. I was about to ask him what he meant when a voice called out to us. I looked over to see a man coming our way. His hair was completely white, but his face was not old enough to match his hair color. He appeared familiar, but I couldn't place where I'd see his features before. He stopped in front of us and took off a pair of sunglasses. His eyes were completely white, along with everything else. 2 scars ran vertically through each cheek and under the corners of his mouth, making it appear as if it was on a hinge. He was friendly enough, and Nick knew him. 202. I haven't worked with you in years. Not since my old partner was around. What are you doing here? Nick asked, looking over at the man. That jogged my memory of how I thought I knew him. We hadn't met, but I'd met his brothers. The corporation hired a great deal of numbered agents that all looked very similar. Each went by a number instead of a name and had black hair. I've never met someone with a number lower than 202, so he must be their older brother. I was in the area and thought I would drop by and help. I go by Thule now. You've grown up a lot. The last time we saw each other you were a foot shorter. I was suddenly very interested in getting Thule alone to speak with him about Nick. He not only knew him when he was younger, but he knew Nick's old partner as well. She had died and the topic was completely off limits to talk about with Nikki. He didn't even remember her name from the shock of being forced to kill her. No one would tell me how though, or the real reason why. It was something that wasn't any of my business, but I still wanted to know everything I could about my partner. Nick didn't have a clue about my inner thoughts as he explained to the other agent about the case. Thule brought a pale hand up to his face to rub his chin, deep in thought about how to proceed. They both knew something about ghosts that I didn't. A ghost, huh? Those are tricky. You have a human partner to help deal with it, but he trailed off, both him and Nick appearing to dread what we were facing. A black ring caught the fading light. I'd seen so few married agents I couldn't stop myself from asking about it. Thule's face turned into an unpracticed smile. He seemed the type to not have many reasons to be happy about stuff until recently. We got sidetracked as he proudly showed off some photos of his husband and adopted son on his phone. We should be focusing on the case, but his son was adorable. He looked to be about 3 and had fluffy brown hair. On some photos he had big dog ears on the top of his head from being a half-breed. At least he ended up with a normal name like Casper instead of Slim Jim. His human father must have named him. When that was out of our system, we looked over to the dark cemetery again. It was summer, but it still felt a bit damp and chilly. That or my brain was playing tricks on me. So, what's the deal with ghosts? I asked, still unaware of what we were dealing with. It's complicated. Supernatural creatures can't deal with ghosts. They drain our energy and there is nothing we can do about it. We're not even certain that what we call ghosts are real spirits, or just memories of humans infused with magic after their death. Thule explained as he led the way down the road. Vic stayed behind me. At first, I thought he was protecting me, but the nervous look in his eyes made me think he was a bit scared of haunted places. I was scared to death of spiders, so I couldn't tease him. I silently offered my hand, which he gladly took, confirming my suspicion. If it is a ghost, then what can we do? If we came across a spirit haunting the place, could we deal with it? I had 2 supernatural creatures with me, one who didn't look as if he could handle even seeing a ghost, let alone fight one. Thule kept walking, keeping an eye out for anything strange. We can only confirm whether it's a ghost and then leave and call the specialized task force. I don't know what they are, but they can deal with spirits while we can't. You could, but we can't put you in that situation, the agent said. I should do something if I'm able. I pressed. Both him and Nick shook their heads, showing how dangerous of an idea that was. They outright refused to tell me more. Apparently, a human dealing with a ghost was simple. If they told me how to do it, I could go against their wishes. I was definitely not happy about being kept in the dark. After everything I'd been through, I would think dealing with one wandering spirit wouldn't be a big deal. We found the spot where most of the sightings occurred. Both agents looked around the area, trying to find signs of creatures or magic. When they came up empty, we were forced to use the wait and see method we used pretty often. If nothing happened in a few hours, we would keep looking around the graveyard for any more strange signs. Nick went over the murder case with Thule as we kept an eye out. A 50-year-old man was found essentially torn apart a few nights ago. The scene wasn't even fully cleaned up yet. The police were keeping watch at night, but Nick sent them away for us to take over. So far, there were no leads on what happened. No one could place an animal that could do such terrible damage on the scene. And the man didn't have anyone in his life who would want to do such a thing. In fact, he didn't have anyone in his life at all. If this was a random murder, it would be hard to solve. They both went over ideas of what creatures it may be, but couldn't settle on a particular one in the end. If it was anything they had considered, there would be traces left behind. It all was pointing towards a ghost which they didn't want to believe. Aside from the trouble that came from dealing with them, ghosts tended to never get strong enough to harm the living. As we waited, I tried to catch Thule alone to talk to him about anything involving Nick's past he might be willing to share. I never got the chance. A mist started to form at our feet which wasn't too strange on its own, but then a figure drifted between the markers. My back was turned, so I only saw the pair of them grow pale. I turned my head just in time to see the figure fade, my heart nearly stopping from the sight. "We should go," Thule said, carefully looking around, trying to find the shape again. He was too far away from Nick when the ghastly shape came out of thin air. It was made up of fog and resembled a human form. A wispy hand reached over to plunge into my partner's chest before he could move. I raced over, shoving him out of the way, the hand going through him and Nick collapsing on the grass. The shape now turned towards to face me, no longer a white cloud. It sprang up with an ear-piercing scream, the colors changing between black and a deep red. The entire thing came down on me, plunging my body into a cold, painful darkness. I couldn't feel my body as I was assaulted by overlapping memories and so much emotional pain. I thought my chest would split open. Voices spoke over each other, making it impossible to make sense of it all. It felt like I was in that spot for ages, but it was really only a few seconds. Someone grabbed me around the waist, and I was lifted off the ground. That terrible pain stayed with me as I was being carried away at a frightening pace. I slowly recovered, with my chest only slightly throbbing. I looked around to see that I was out of the graveyard. Thule was breathing hard because he carried both Nick and I away from danger. I was resting against the fence looking for my partner when my eyes traveled to look at where we came from. That awful black shape was searching between gravestones, crying out and looking for us. In that moment, I knew why they didn't tell me how to deal with a ghost. It was far too dangerous, but deep down I knew what needed to be done. Nick was awake, but the small touch had drained him. His hair appeared slightly lighter than before, and he could barely stand. "The ghost can't leave the cemetery. We need to call in for backup," Thule said while helping Nick to his feet. "How long is that going to take?" I asked, rattled from what happened. "A few days, maybe a few weeks. They're really backed up, and that's why they sent someone else to make certain it was a ghost first. We'll just block off the area so no one gets hurt until then," he explained, looking over to the shape floating around. I stood in front of him, firm in my resolve. A few days wasn't good enough. "I'm going to help him," I said in a serious tone. What I felt in those few seconds was someone in pain. More pain than anyone should ever be forced to feel. Through all of that, I felt I knew I could reach the person under it all. If I could just talk to him, then maybe I could help. If I didn't, I risked being taken in along with all the pain he was feeling. No wonder they didn't want to tell me how to deal with a ghost. "Skylar," Nick started. He wanted nothing more than to stop me. I was risking more than my life going in to save another from suffering. But he didn't know what to say to keep me from going forward. He knew I couldn't just leave after seeing all of this. "You can try, but we'll still pull you out in a few minutes," he said sternly. That was all I needed. At least I hoped so. He trusted me, and I trusted my partner to drag me to safety if things got too bad. Thule wasn't very impressed, but didn't go against what two partners had decided on. They walked with me to the gate, ready to help if the ghost made any moves to harm me physically. I took a few steps inside the cemetery and waited for the ghost to come to me. It didn't take long for it to notice someone breathing. The mass of twisting smoke charged at me with a scream as I stood, bracing for the impact. The moment it touched my body, I was thrown in the same painful chaos as before. It was like swimming through acid. Everything hurt. The coldness was freezing my heart as so many images flashed over top of each other. And yet, I could sense one stable thing in this darkness. I forced myself through it. I just needed to find the person under all of this. My skin felt as if it was peeling off as I pushed on, calling out to the unknown person I was trying to reach. My hand was outstretched, trying to find someone in all this pain. By sheer chance, a timid hand reached over to pull me through. I was dragged from the sea of memories into a dark, empty space. The person who helped me, gone. It was instead replaced by a floating and menacing void. I wasn't fully recovered from the amount of pain I had just went through, but I didn't have much time. I needed to speak with whoever was here. "Talk to me, please. Tell me what happened," I said, my voice shaking. The void stayed silent. I felt waves of anger ripple off the void at my question. Slowly standing up, I braced against those feelings to keep going. "Did you kill that man? He didn't deserve it, you." I was knocked over by the sheer force of the rage coming off the ghost. It tightened my lungs to the point where I thought I was dying. All of a sudden, that mass was onto of me, forcing my body down. "He earned his death." The voice was loud, shrieking and overlapping itself. The words were nearly overpowering my brain. "Then let me understand," I shouted, trying to get through to them. With another shout of rage, something slammed into my body. A pool of emotion so vast it weighted as much as the sea. I was tossed downwards. Somewhere inside a memory the ghost would prefer to keep hidden. A memory of being a normal high school student. A small quiet boy who kept to himself, but who was secretly in love with the star football player. Or at least he thought it was a secret. I felt the mass standing next to me watching his past. Just someone trying to slip by in life unnoticed. I was scared to death of the ghost that could crush me without a second thought. But he didn't. Deep down, he wanted someone else to know what happened to him and what caused his death. I dreaded what I would see, fearing the worst. Reaching out my hand, I begged the ghost to take it while we watched. only to have it left empty. The ghost couldn't even remember his own name. His mind turned into a twisted mass of hatred. But he remembered that night when he was invited to the cemetery by 3 of the most popular boys in school. How he went, thinking he was going to make some friends, only to have them turn on him and beat him for hearing how he had a crush on their football star. The one he cared about was watching the entire thing with a terrible smile on his face. When they left, it was just him and the football player alone. The boy cried and said how sorry he was for his feelings, for being the way he was. I felt a hand grasp mine. The memory was becoming blurry as the ghost refused to watch what happened next. Enough was clear for me to know, and I held onto the hand in my own with such a feeling of sadness overtaking me I thought I would collapse. That other student forced himself on the young boy all those years ago. It was not something he wanted. He once loved the other boy, and that was shattered by one act. His body was beaten and broken, and now so was his soul. I wished I could march back into time to save him, to do anything so he didn't need to go through that night. The boy wisely reported the assault to the police. Disgust rose in my throat when the officer dealing with the case turned it around, blaming him for the assault, saying the football player claimed self-defense and the smaller guy was the aggressor. With the rumors of his sexuality, the lie was something the police wanted to believe. I fully understood the ghost's hatred. He didn't have anyone on his side. The police refused to help him. His school turned on him, and his father later beat him as well when he found out what happened. Tears were freely coming down my face while I was watching all of this. I truly hated everyone who did nothing to save this ghost when he was alive. Unable to deal with everything, he went to the cemetery to end things where they started. Since then, he had remained here, those memories playing on a loop and all of his emotions twisting until he became something else, something dark that was getting stronger each year. By chance, the one who was the reason he had taken his own life had come to the cemetery drunk. If it was to relive that night, or to try and make amends, the ghost didn't care. All he knew was that it was the man who wronged him. All that rage and hatred poured into a single attack, destroying the one who harmed him so deeply. And after it was finished, his rage didn't lessen in the slightest. He wanted to kill everyone who hurt him. Then that rage grew to the point he just wanted to hurt everyone around him. If I left this ghost alone, he would become a danger. I didn't want that. I just wanted to see the quiet, shy boy he was before. He refused to show me anymore, and I'd seen enough to understand how he ended up the way he did. The rest was on me to get through to him. We returned to the dark, empty space again. My hand was empty as I faced the mass of rage and hatred. You can't let yourself be like this. You're just hurting yourself. Listen, I understand how you feel. My words were cut off when the ghost got in front of me, threatening to overpower me with those toxic emotions. I raised my hands, flinching at the feeling of heat suddenly burning my face. You, how could someone like you understand me? The words shook the space. Countless arms appeared from the dark to grab a hold and pry. They wanted to dig into my past to show I truly couldn't relate to how the ghost suffered. If he wanted to see, I would let him. I hadn't gone through the same thing he did. Not even close, but I had enough experiences of my own so that I could relate with him. I could tell the ghost beside me was shocked when I opened up and let him see some of my memories. Growing up with a female body came with a bit of a cost, unless you were very lucky. He stayed beside me, silently watching as I let him see every time a man directed a gross comment my way, or slipped a touch when they thought they could get away with it. Friends in school only being friendly to get into my pants, and refusing a no for an answer once they asked. There'd been so many minor comments and instances I'd honestly forgotten most of them. The major one was just before I moved out, and the main reason why my parents kicked me to the curb. They tried everything to make me act more like a girl. I'd cut my hair, started to wear binders, and only let them call me their daughter so I didn't need to deal with the fallout. Every time I heard my female name, my heart hurt. They convinced me to wear a dress to a wedding and take a family friend as a date. I'd known him since I was a kid, and he was 3 years older than myself. I never saw him as anything but another guy. I was 15 back then. I was suddenly being cornered in an empty room at the wedding venue by my forced date. I refused all of his advances, and he grew angry. After he tore the strap of the stupid dress I was wearing, I snapped. I was half his size, and yet I still kicked the living shit out of him with the help of a chair nearby. Only after that happened, it came out that my parents told him he could do anything to me in order to make me act more like a girl. I could have killed them for that. Our fight was massive, and I was at my sister's place the next day. Thinking back, I realized how lucky I'd gotten. If I was in a different spot, or didn't have a blunt object to use as a weapon, I didn't know if I would have turned out the same way as the ghost next to me. That wasn't the only memory that made me relate to this ghost. One of my most hated moments came to light. He wanted to see it, so I showed him. One that I never stopped hating myself for. It was 2 years after moving in with my sister. She had just had her son. All of us crammed into a dirty, small apartment. She was often working at night, leaving me to take care of the kids while her boyfriend at the time did who knew what. I was cleaning the bathroom, trying my best to take my mind off everything. I hadn't slept in days. My diet was awful and I was barely able to keep up with school and work. When I came across a broken disposable razor, I hesitated with it, hovering over the trash. I wasn't stressed by my body then, or my life as a whole. It was the noise I wanted to stop. There was always so much damn noise. The babies crying at home, people at school screaming between breaks, the restaurant I worked as a dishwasher always busy and loud. There wasn't a moment of peace back then, and I hated it. I just wanted some peace and quiet. For a moment, I nearly went through with it, but a small noise was what snapped me out of it. My niece, just a few years old at the time, knocked softly on the door. Her little voice was asking for her uncle to come and help with her screaming brother. She never called me her uncle before. That one word kept me going. I threw out the blade, disgusted with myself. I tossed out the trash first and took care of my nephew, feeling crazy that I even considered leaving them. Then, a few days passed and the noise came back. My mind kept going back to the blade buried under the trash, now long gone. In those moments, I kept telling myself just one more day. No matter what was happening, I needed to go on for one more day. I repeated that same sentence in my head every day while I lived with my sister, and then a few times a day after our fight when I moved out to be on my own. Just one more day and I would be a cop, which I failed at. One more day and I could become a pie, which was close enough. One more day so I could save some money for my sister. Just keep going. One more day. Then a day came and went when I never said it to myself. Then I never repeated it again. We returned back to the dark space. The ghost was flickering, appearing more human than before. "You're angry," he said, his voice no longer twisted. I found myself crying. Unable to wipe the tears away, I nodded. "I've never been so angry in my life. I'm mad because you didn't have anyone. It's not fair. Nothing was fair with you," I said with some bitterness in my voice. "I gave up. You didn't." I didn't want him to think that. Taking a risk, I went over to take a hold of the wispy form, the body stiffening under my grasp. There was someone in there, past all the pain he's suffered with for so long. This was such a tricky topic, and I felt as if I had no right to speak on it. "I think you were fighting every day, and you just lost once. You didn't give up. It wasn't something that was bound to happen either. If you just had someone, anyone, it might have been easier for you. We might have had similar experiences, but he was such a different person, and he went through so much more than most." I was angry that he never got to grow up and live a better life, but not mad at him for a moment of weakness. So many things were working against him back then. His body felt more solid as I spoke, and his arms wrapped around my chest as if holding on for dear life. "What's your name? Do you remember?" I asked gently. "Drew." A hint of a word came through some soft sobs. I still couldn't see him clearly, but most of his anger was replaced with grief. I didn't know if that was better or not. "I wish I could have met you while you were alive." It was a wonder I got those words out clearly through my own tears. He was so small in my arms and I held him tight. He wasn't alive, and nothing could ever make that right. While he was alive, not a single person ever showed any hints that they wanted him around. It was only after he died that he found someone who cared about him without question. I never wanted to leave him behind, but there was a time limit. Just as his grief started to lessen, I was pulled away, losing my grip on Drew. I found myself on my back, staring up at a worried Nick and Tuli. My face was stained with tears, and neither of them knew what to do. Unable to stop, I started to cry harder than I ever have in my life. They awkwardly tried their best to calm me down, with no luck. If I wasn't so distraught, I would be embarrassed by such a display in front of my partner. At least when you cry that hard, your body can't keep up with it. In less than 10 minutes, my sobbing fit was over. I still felt completely miserable. There was no sign of the ghost and the sun was rising. The pair dragged me from the cemetery, but I didn't wake up for a few hours. They had called the ghost specialist, who rushed over when they found out a human was currently being attacked by a spirit. The man who dealt with ghosts came shortly after and swooped in to take care of the situation. He made Nick put his suit jacket on my shoulders, then forced all three of us to eat some chocolate to calm down. Tuli made a face from how sweet it was, but made no complaint as he nibbled on a small square. My poor partner was traumatized by my reaction and was unable to eat, no matter how much he was prodded to do so. "It tastes better if you share," the newcomer explained with a wink. It made me feel only slightly better. He was dressed in a suit as well, showing he was part of the corporation. He carefully picked out his words to say how disappointed he was with the other two for letting me take care of a ghost on my own. His red eyes were burning on an overall calm face. His hair was white and tied back, but he wasn't albino and lacking pigments like his eyes and hair color would suggest. You really shouldn't have gone through all that. The problem is, for the most part, only humans can deal with ghosts because they can let them in and listen to their feeling. It's very risky. You were lucky this wasn't a ghost that was completely rotten to the core. Manny, the specialist, spoke. His tone sounded disappointed that I had put myself in the line of danger to help. I needed to do it. I couldn't let him suffer any longer. My chest still hurt. It was as if a black hole opened up inside my rib cage. Manny smiled, fully understanding what I was going through. The best people to help spirits are the ones who get ruined after one or two experiences. They have kind hearts that break so easily for others. I looked off into the distance, trying to sense if Drew was still hovering around, doubting he was put to rest after our meeting. I wanted to know what happened to him. Is he still here? I asked in a bit of daze. Manny reached out a finger to poke at my chest. I'm afraid you're haunted. He'll always be living here. Until you die, you're stuck with him. I nearly cried again. That black hole became heavier for a second. Just for a second. A small warmth started under all that pain I would carry now. It came from knowing I would never forget him, and in a way that kept him alive when Drew didn't have a chance to live before. Nick finally helped me to my feet as I did my best to clean my face. Can you boys do me a favor and never take on a ghost on your own again? Just stick to whatever you do. You fight like werewolves, right? Manny asked, his tone starting out harsh, then confused. No, Nick answered. Sometimes, Thule replied. We all looked over at him. Werewolves were real. How have I never heard about that yet? There are still far too many things I didn't know after getting involved with supernatural creatures so often. Manny forced us to leave and ordered me to take a day off. Nick was in charge of making sure that happened, which he took very seriously. We got Thule's number so we could call him in case we needed help on a different case. He was semi-retired and could pick what jobs he wanted to do. If we needed him, he would come running. I wanted to go to work and get my mind off what happened. Every time I tried, Nick blocked the door of my apartment. He could easily just pick up his smaller thrashing partner to shove back into the bedroom to rest. It was boring staying at home. He even took away my phone so I couldn't work from bed. It took some convincing, but I got Nick to let me stay on the couch. I simply couldn't be alone with my thoughts that day. He stayed the entire day and made dinner later on with the meager supplies in my cupboard. I could watch him from the couch. His back was turned as the sounds of the knife hitting the cutting board came from the kitchen. Seeing him being so domestic made my chest hurt again. He wasn't really suited to being an agent. Mickey should be living a normal life somewhere, just cooking or taking care of his rescued pets. He never mentioned how the corporation forced him to work as an agent, but that needed to be the case. He disliked killing, and yet he was tasked to eliminate supernatural threats. Nicky, why are you still an agent? I asked him. He paused, cutting for a few seconds, the knife hovering in his hand. I couldn't see his face and could only imagine his expression. My memories are very hazy. Most are missing from my early life. But I know that someone carried me out of the catacombs. I could never find out who it was, but it was an agent. My only goal was to be like that person. I simply want to help people. He continued cutting, and meanwhile a pot was boiling on the stove, making the apartment feel warm. Things were always so simple with Nick. He wanted to help, so he did. At first, I wanted to work with him for the money. Now, I dove headfirst into danger and into something that could change me forever in order to help him, even if it was just in the smallest of ways, without thinking about the money. Taking this job had resulted in making friends and my phone being filled with new contacts. Without any doubt, risking my life every day was worth it. I might be able to save someone, but I might also be able to have small calm moments like Nick cooking dinner in the next room.